This is Rostra, the St. Theodore Guerin Junior Classical League podcast, where we bring the lessons of classical study into the light for the benefit of all.
So welcome back to another episode of Rostra. We're really fortunate today on this episode, as we really are with every episode. I don't know why I say that, as if the other episodes were not fortunate. But we're certainly fortunate today. We've got Maggie Ruvalcaba. She's a Latin 1 student here. And Maggie, tell everybody what grade you're in and what your topic is that we're going to talk about today.
I'm a freshman, and my topic is the Odyssey.
You're a freshman, and your topic is the Odyssey. Now, I think if you talk to almost any high school student in the United States, they're going to say they have read the Odyssey at some point in some English class. So let me ask you, have you read it before? Are you reading it now? And why did you want to pick this particular topic?
So the reason I chose this topic is because I've read it about 3 times. One of the times was when I was younger. It used to be my favorite book, which was a little bit weird because I was like 9 years old at the time. But I was homeschooled and I really loved that book whenever my mom would read it. The reason I think I like it so much was because it's just like all over the place and just a really big adventure.
It is all over the place. It's a really big adventure story. You just actually said so much in that one sentence. We could probably just tear that apart for 2 or 3 episodes. First of all, you were into this back at age 9. Okay, so that is really cool in and of itself. You mentioned being homeschooled back then, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I don't know that it's necessarily true of all homeschool students, but I've certainly seen this with a lot of homeschool students, they seem to be very well read. Students who have come up with a really great love of reading. You mentioned your mom reading to you, and obviously getting you hooked on the kind of adventure stories and so forth. So what struck you the most about the Odyssey back then or even later that you say, hey, this is one of my favorite books? Because obviously you said you read it 3 times, for heaven's sake, so you obviously like it. What are some things that really strike you about it?
The adventures, really, most of it. I don't like reading a lot, which we just said a lot of homeschool people
Okay.
But I really liked reading the Odyssey because there's just so much adventure and there's so many things that happened, like back and forth. He would go from one thing right to another right afterwards.
Yeah. Well, and I often tell students that those stories of the Trojan War, that was basically your Marvel movies back in the day, right? You think about the Iron Mans and the Captain America and the Winter Soldier and Endgame and all those different Marvel movies and the big Marvel universe and so forth. That's the Odyssey. And it's exactly what you said, right? It's back and forth, and he goes here, he goes there, and has all these different adventures and so forth. So somebody, and I do think it's really interesting, so you may not enjoy reading so much in general, but this story has really captured you. And again, you said it, you read it 3 times. So you picked that as a topic to talk about. What all have you found out about the Odyssey that maybe you didn't know before?
Well, I feel like I knew most of it. I didn't know that the author, Homer, wrote a lot more books. I actually didn't know that. I thought that was like his only book, but I was definitely wrong about that.
Yeah, and especially there's a big, because you do know that this is a poem, right? Mm-hmm. The Odyssey really is a poem. It's a giant book-length poem. And he wrote one before that called the Iliad, which is another book-length poem all about the Trojan War. So it's really all about the fighting and the warfare and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Then you get to the Odyssey, which still has some of that stuff in it, but it's got more of the adventure, like you said, and the travel. So yeah, Homer, wildly popular, so maybe you didn't know that. What else did you discover?
I feel like I knew most of the other stuff just because I've read it so many times.
Yeah.
Most of those key story plot points and stuff. I got to revisit a couple of the stories that I hadn't heard in a while, though. That was
nice.
Fun.
So I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned different stories, and again, if you think about even an hour-long TV show, all right, there's the main plot, but then there's usually 2 or 3 subplots going on throughout that episode. Certainly a big 2.5-hour feature film. certainly a series like, again, the Marvel movies and so forth. You've got all these other plots that are going on, and so you've got all these other little stories. So that's one question I want to ask you. What maybe is one or two of your favorite other stories within the Odyssey? Because the main story, right, is Odysseus trying to get home after the Trojan War, right? That's the main plot. What are some of those other sub-stories that really took your attention?
I think his name is Alias, the wind god.
Yeah.
It was really fun with the wind spirits because in the book he gives him wind spirits, and then Odysseus accidentally, lets all of those out, and that did not go very well for him.
Yeah. And I got to say, and at some point, we're actually going to talk about this in your class, because we actually read, because Homer wrote in Greek originally, and so we're going to read a little Latin version of this at some point. And I always talk about that part of the story with Aeolus, the god of the winds. And I'm thinking, if Odysseus had been a better leader, if he had just told his men what was in the sack and why they shouldn't open it up, this wouldn't have been a problem. But he didn't. And so, okay, so that's one. What's another one that really struck your attention?
At the beginning of the book, after the Trojan War, Odysseus is trying to get home, but Calypso is forcing him to stay on an island and be her love.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really like that because, of course, he wants to go home, but she really loves him, so she wants him to stay.
And it's another part of why that story's been so popular. You have obviously enjoyed it, but so many people have enjoyed it, really for pushing close to 3,000 years now, given the time that Homer was alive. This is close to 3,000 years ago. And one of the parts of that story is, he wanted to get home, but then there's all these other temptations. Mm-hmm. And it's like any of us, right? You might want to make, the softball team, or you want to make first chair violin in the orchestra, or we have all these goals, something else comes along, kind of sidetracks us, right? Next thing you know, we're lost there. Okay. It's got a cast of thousands, all right? I mean, there's Odysseus, main star, right? Main actor, if you will. But there's so many other characters in the Odyssey. Who are some of the characters that you have really enjoyed?
His wife, Penelope, was pretty cool. I thought she was really smart because when he finally does get home at the end of the book, she says that the only person she would marry, the only one of the suitors that had been at her house that could do the axe throw that her husband could do.
Yeah.
Because she was already suspicious that Odysseus was there disguised as someone else. And, of course, Odysseus was the only one who was able to do it. And
right.
So she found out immediately that it was him once he did it.
Exactly. Penelope is a sharp individual, right? And you think about the earlier scene where she says to the suitors, like, oh, okay, I'll marry one of you, but only after I finish weaving this funeral shroud. And then every night she undoes her work and really just draws it out. Mm-hmm. So that was very, very shrewd and very cunning on her part. Same thing here, right? So, listen, I'm not going to trade down. I got to marry a guy at least as good as my other husband, right? My first husband. So one of you guys has got to be able to shoot that arrow through all those axes. So very, very cool on Penelope. Who else?
I thought Athena and his friend, the swineherder, were pretty cool because they kind of worked together to get him back home, and Athena disguised him in the first place, and the swineherder helped him get back into the house.
And boy, it's interesting that you bring those two together, and I'm not making this up when I say I have not really thought about those two characters together before, but you're really making me think about that because here they both helped him. Mm-hmm. And both helped with some manner of disguise and trickery, right, so he could get back in. Mm-hmm. And yet one is supposed to be a deity, the goddess Athena. The other is a fairly lowly guy in the kingdom, the swineherd. And yet they are both working together for the sake of this one guy. Yeah. And so forth. And clearly Odysseus is her favorite. She loves him among all the mortals and all that kind of stuff. So very, very cool. So if you were to tell somebody else, hey, I recommend this book, I think you should read it. Why? What would you tell somebody? And whether it be a young person, maybe, a 9 or 10-year-old, like when you first discovered it, maybe somebody your age or even older, what would be your reason for recommending they read the Odyssey?
Well, there's so much going on. It's a story about a man trying to get home, and there's so many cool characters, from a wind god and Athena to a Cyclops who gets really badly injured. And he does eventually get home, and it's just the way that he gets there is just so interesting and intriguing every step of the way, and you just can't wait for him to get home. It's just exciting.
Yeah, and you've used those words quite a bit. I mean, it's exciting, it's intriguing, and certainly I would say maybe even if somebody doesn't enjoy reading so much, that would be a good one to get them reading, exactly as you said. So from your research, is there anything else you want to make sure to say on this podcast? Because you say, you know what, I don't want to get off of here until the people have heard this.
I don't really know. I just really think that everyone should read this book because it's a pretty amazing book. And I think the part with the Cyclops is pretty exciting.
And the part with the Cyclops is very exciting. I will spare our readers the gory details, which you well know. You talked about him getting wounded in a particular way, and oh, yes, he does. So, listeners, if you want to figure that out, you got to read that book for yourself. Maggie, thanks so much for bringing some life to the Odyssey, and hopefully we'll have you back on another episode.
Thank you for listening to Rostra. You may check out all our episodes on Spotify and follow us on social media at GuerinJCL. That's at GuerinJCL.